For more, we turn tonight to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart of MS Now. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, Jack.
So, David, what did we learn this week from President Trump's climb down on acquiring Greenland about his instincts, his sense of leverage, and the limits of his approach?
Well, he does have a method that he uses over and over again, which is to overreach, to offend everybody, and then back off. And he sort of did that. And that would be the benign explanation of what happened this week. The serious explanation is that this, I think, was probably the final break in the post-war international order. That we've taken it for granted that we in the West, as we call it, are democracies aligned and friends with each other. And what really struck me this week was how many European leaders, Mark Carney from Canada, how much pleasure they took in being bitterly breaking, divorcing with America. And that we're never going back to that. And I asked Europeans, like, is it like that Taylor Swift song, We Are Never Getting Back Together? And they said, yes, that's what it's like. We are never getting back together, because they say, you might elect a sane person in 2028, but you're always 4 years away from another one of these. And so they were really rethinking the whole global architecture. And it should be concerning to Americans, as Robert Kagan wrote in The Atlantic this week. We're going to look back on the Cold War with nostalgia, and we're going to look back on the post-Cold War world as if it was paradise. And that we're just entering, as Kagan wrote, the most dangerous time in American foreign policy since World War II.
Jonathan, should allies take some reassurance from the outcome that Trump ultimately backed off his tariffs and territorial demands, or concern about the way that it started?
I think the allies, particularly with Greenland, they understood what was happening, and I think, to David's point, this was the break. Going after Greenland, territory of Denmark, NATO ally, the president of the United States was willing to blow up NATO in order to get Greenland. And I watched the speech he gave at Davos with just my jaw on the ground for how many norm-busting things he said. And I kept going back to David's point about the Europeans thinking we're like one election away from this happening again. When Vice President Kamala Harris went to the Munich Security Summit, the first year of the Biden-Harris administration, she gave a speech. She sat down with the outgoing president, who asked, President Biden says America is back. But the question is, for how long? Europeans have been wary of the United States since the first term of Donald Trump. And I think the speech by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, to me, was the rhetorical break. Because what I heard from him in style and language was all the things we're used to hearing from an American president, setting the table for what it means to be a global collective unit that is as much about security as it is about mutual prosperity. And it was the Canadian Prime Minister who stood up for that, only to be threatened the next day by the President of the United States for saying those exact words.
You mentioned Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister. Here he is in his own words.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. The middle powers must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. We shouldn't allow the rise of hard power to blind us to the fact that the power of legitimacy, integrity, and rules will remain strong if we choose to wield them together.
A rupture, he says. And David, if governing by strength and spectacle is a defining feature of the Trump era, how sustainable is that approach for allies who are trying to manage this relationship for the next 3 years?
Yeah, well, it's governing by pure rancor. And, Donald Trump has set out to create a world where gangsters can have free rein, and that the people who believe in the use of force above the rule of law, they should be able to run the show. And what's perverse about it is that he seems to have gone back to some sphere of influence idea from the 19th century, giving Russia that region, giving China that region, as long as we get to control our region. And this is simply, it's just an illusion to think you can take this approach and it won't lead to bloodshed. We've already seen since 2013, I think I mentioned this in the show some weeks before, that the number of people who died in war deaths from 1990 to 2013 was like 15,000 a year. After 2013, it surged to over 100,000 people a year. So we're always seeing a massive ramp up in bloodshed. And then when you get to where it's gangster versus gangster, we can expect that to continue or to exacerbate.
Well, while at Davos, the president launched what he's calling the Board of Peace, and the board's official mandate was to help oversee the Gaza Strip under an Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal brokered by the Trump administration last year, though the president has hinted at broader ambitions here. It's not exactly clear how this will all operate. And Jonathan, some allies worry that this board could undermine the UN. But could the opposite be true? Could this board, could the reason the board exists, could that be because the UN has struggled to adapt to modern conflicts and geopolitical realities?
I mean, maybe.